I think that the biggest question that I get asked as a loan officer is, when is it a right time to buy a home? And I think that the reality is, for a lot of people, just because that you can buy a home right now doesn't necessarily mean that you should buy a home. Now, I've talked a lot on this channel about why buying a home and why real estate is a great way to start building wealth for you, but that doesn't mean that you need to be jumping in right away. And until you're really ready, there's nothing wrong with renting until you're ready to actually buy a home in the first place. So today, I've partnered up with my friends over at Money Under 30 to give you guys the 5 questions that you need to be asking yourself to figure out if you're actually ready to buy your first home. Coming up. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name's Keaton. I'm a loan officer from San Diego, California, and on this channel, I help people just like you learn how to build wealth through real estate. So like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there's a lot of questions that you really want to start asking yourself to figure out if you're financially prepared to even buy a home in the first place. And I'm sure while you're watching this video, you're probably going to have even more questions. So feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. I answer every single comment. And if you want to skip around, I leave the chapters down below. All right, so the first question is your financial house in order? And what I really mean by that is it's really surrounded around how much debt do you have and what kind of mix of debt is that? For most of us, we're not really debt free. You know, we've probably got a few credit cards, an auto loan, maybe a couple of student loans. So you really want to be focused on how much debt do you have, how much is that costing you per month, and how can you start really chipping away at that? As a mortgage lender, one of the biggest things that's going to determine your purchasing power is going to be your debt to income ratio, which I've talked about on this channel. And to make it really simply, all debt to income ratio is your gross monthly debts divided by your gross monthly income. So by reducing the amount of debt that you have, you're actually going to be doing 2 things for yourself. Number one, you're going to increase your purchasing power. Every $50 a month in debt that you can knock off is another $10,000 in purchasing power for your first home. And on top of that, as you start knocking off debt, your credit score is going to rise as well. And while you don't necessarily have to have a perfect credit score to buy a home, you want to have that score as high as possible so you can take advantage of some great programs and get a better interest rate as well. And as a side note, I understand that, of course, a lot of things happen in people's lives. There's a reason why people get into debt. And I've said it before, that debt isn't inherently a bad thing. But if you want to put yourself in the absolute best position to buy a home, you want to start knocking out as much of that debt as possible. Once you've figured out that you've put yourself in a great financial position with your debt, the next question you want to ask is, do you have enough saved for a down payment? For most of us, the down payment on your first home is probably going to be the biggest financial investment you've ever made in your life. And even if you're putting down the minimum down payment, in places like California, 3% down on a $500,000 home is still $15,000. That's probably the most people have spent in their entire lives. And while we're on the subject of a down payment, don't forget that there are other unforeseen costs when it comes to buying a home. Not only do you have to account for your down payment, which is anywhere from 3 to 5% of the price of the home, but you're also going to have to pay for closing costs, which could be another 2 to 3%. Add on top of that things like an appraisal, a home inspection, termite reports. The costs can add up pretty quickly, and if you're not prepared for that, you might not be able to buy a home in the first place. And that's just me talking about the cost to actually close the deal. Once you're a homeowner, you've also got other expenses to deal with, including the maintenance and upkeep of your home, and of course the fun stuff like decorating and remodeling. So the last thing that I want you to do is to empty out your bank account in order to buy a home and not have money left over for those extra expenses, and then you end up opening up credit cards, installment loans, and you're right back to step one. So when you're preparing to buy a home, ask yourself the question, do I have enough money to not just close this deal, but also have enough money to live comfortably as well and be ready for any unforeseen expenses? Now, while having good credit and having enough money to close a deal is a big part of buying a home, the biggest part, honestly, is knowing if you can actually afford payment. When it comes to buying a home, the thing that you'll probably hear from most mortgage lenders and real estate agents is buying a home is cheaper than renting. And depending on where you live, that might be true. But the reality is, if you're putting a minimum down payment on your first home, once you include things like property taxes, homeowners insurance, HOA dues if you're in a condo, things like mortgage insurance, the cost of owning a home on a monthly basis could be the same or even more than the monthly rent that you would pay for a similar priced apartment. Now, while mortgage calculators online can be a great resource to figure out what your monthly payment is for just your mortgage, when you're looking at your overall budget and trying to figure out if you can afford to buy a home, you will really want to be thinking about, okay, what are my costs for utilities? What are my costs for all the subscriptions like Netflix and Uber Eats and Instacart that I might have? Grocery are a big part of that as well. You want to look at the overall picture of your budget and see really where that mortgage payment is going to fit into the big picture instead of just getting caught up with, maybe I can make that payment work. Now, a thing to note is that personal finance is personal. 25% of your take-home income for somebody who makes $10,000 is super different for someone who makes only $2,000. So kind of keep in mind, you've got different budgets going on. Don't always follow an exact rule, but look at your overall budget and really think carefully about the kind of life that you want to live, the kind of comfortability that you want to live, and the places that you're buying as well. Now, once you've got all the big and heavy questions out of the way when it comes to financing, the next two are pretty personal. And the first one is, are you ready to actually settle down in a place for an extended period of time? One of the things that people will point to as a benefit of renting is the fact that you're usually in a lease either month to month or in a 12-month lease. Which means if you get bored of the place that you live, you could always just move somewhere else, and you may or may not get that security deposit back. And while yes, in theory, you could do the same thing with a home and you can sell it if you get bored of the place that you're living in, or maybe you outgrow the place that you bought, the reality is it's actually a little bit harder to sell a home than it is to just move from apartment to apartment. I mean, unless you're a professional flipper who does this for a living, the reality is that you're probably not going to be able to make a decent profit on your home, or at least get all that money back that you spent initially to buy the home if you have to sell within the first couple of years. Now, I know if you're watching this video in 2022, it's kind of a weird and crazy market. You know, you see people who bought a home and sold it a year later and they made over $100,000. This market is definitely a unicorn. This is the exception. This isn't the rule. The reality is a typical market will really only appreciate anywhere from 2 to 4% year over year versus the crazy gains that we've seen over the last 2 years. Which means if you're trying to sell your home within a shorter period of time, you might not make enough money on the sale of your home to make up a lot of the money that you spent getting into it in the first place. So in reality, if you're not really prepared to stay in your home for an extended period of time, you know, maybe 3 to 5 years at a minimum, whether that's related to your job, your living circumstances, whatever, it might not be the right time for you to buy a home. So once you've answered all of those questions, there's really just one more question you need to ask yourself. And this is something that I kind of figured out myself as a homeowner this year is, can you fix a leak? Like I talked about with having those unforeseen expenses, when it comes to owning a home, you're going to be the one at the end of the day responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of that home. When you're renting a property, you have a landlord or some sort of property manager that you can call up and they can deal with all the things that you happen to break while you're living in that home. But when you're owning a home, that's entirely on you. So if the roof starts leaking, a pipe starts leaking, maybe you got a crack in the baseboards, whatever it is, those are the kinds of expenses and the things that you're gonna need to think about that, you know, can I do those things for myself as a homeowner? Or do I know people that can actually get it done for me for cheap? Or can I afford to pay somebody to come out and fix these things in my home? And I mean, luckily we have things like YouTube, like you're watching on right now, that can help you kind of navigate DIYing your way through keeping up with the maintenance of your home. But sometimes there's gonna be things that break in your home that you're gonna need a professional contractor or professional electrician to come in and fix for you. And what I've come to realize is a lot of those things aren't really cheap. So while these things that happen might not necessarily be super common, you might not experience them within your first few years of ownership, these are things that you want to be prepared for because these little surprises can turn your dream home into an absolute nightmare. So how'd you guys do? Did you answer yes to all of these 5 questions? If you did, I absolutely encourage you to start your process of trying to buy your first home. I think you've probably put yourself in a great position and you've gone through these steps that are necessary in order to make sure that you're financially, emotionally prepared to own a first home. Now, if you answered no to any of these questions, that's okay too. In reality, sometimes we aren't necessarily fully ready to buy a home, but the whole point of this is I want you to actually start thinking about these things before you get your keys and before you get into debt. Buying a home at the end of the day is a big, big decision, and it's probably the biggest investment you're going to make in your life. I always say that it's a big investment, you might as well make it a good one. But it isn't until you answer those questions for yourself and really think about your budget, where you stand with your credit, and where you stand emotionally when it comes to a home, and your preparedness to deal with the things that come along with ownership, that you'll actually realize that you're ready or not ready to own your first home. Because for every huge success story that you see with homeowners making a ton of money on their equity, selling and buying their dream home, there are unfortunately those stories of people who end up going broke because they weren't really ready for the responsibility that comes with owning a home. So just like with any other big investment, as long as you're doing the homework and you understand what you're getting into, you're gonna be successful with it, because that's the beauty of real estate. But if you aren't, it usually doesn't end well. And on this channel, I wanna help people just like you be successful with real estate and build wealth for their families. So here's a few more videos that I think you're gonna enjoy, that are gonna help you build wealth through real estate this year. If you learned something new and this brought you some value, make sure you hit that subscribe button to stay up with all of my latest content, and share this with somebody you think can find a lot of value from this as well. Other than that, have a great day. Bye.